All right. A little bit different kind of talk, sort of along the lines of yesterday. It's called A Study in Consciousness, and it is a homage to Max Heindel, through whom I began to understand these kinds of things. I think you all well know by now that I love mythology, and I love it as a language of the gods. There are things that are said in the life of a story that you can't say didactically. And this is so because the things of the Spirit, even though they're very objective and clear, are universal and they're multifaceted. The life of a story and its moral speak to us. So there's also something in this that in discerning the allegorical meaning of a story, there's something very satisfying in that. The life of a myth is like our myth, only it's much more pithy. It's rife with universal content. So I have this huge library of mythology books. And it contains high myths, and it contains prosaic fairy tales. It carries everything from sacred truths in scriptures right down to profane, worldly wise cunning. I've actually spent 8 years of my life giving talks on mythology or on mysticism through the vehicle of mythology. I would be glad to do that again if there was any interest anywhere, because I got all these great notes and they're just sitting there. I love the exotic imagination in the stories and the retellings of East Indian mythology. Very exotic ideas they have in their stories. And I like those unusual stories of the Native Americans with their sparse details, but clear, primitively clear ideas that they carry. However, between the East and the West, there is a mythology that everybody knows and everybody loves, and that is Greek mythology. We've all laughed at Zeus and at Hermes. We've all admired the feats of Heracles or Perseus, and it's thrilling to read those things. There are pondersome meanings that we get even in parts of it. And there are things that are in the stories, some of them very little, that slip past us. But often we never ask questions about them. Let's take a really rudimentary question. Let's look at it, What does the name Greece mean when we're talking about Greek mythology? Almost all of our language, nearly every word, began as the name of a god or a goddess. Nouns were precipitated as things from the gods. Verbs were the kind of life or action of the gods. And adjectives and other modifiers come from the character of the gods. All of our words almost, if you read very ancient things like Sanskrit, it's just like a concatenation of names. And then when you see what those names can mean in terms of qualities, it's astounding. Greece, the name, is no exception. According to some etymologists, the most reliable ones that I know of, Greece is a diminutive of Graeci, the children of the Grey. The Grey are the Grey Sisters. They're old crones or hags of great wisdom. They were consulted by Perseus when he was on his quest for the head of the Medusa. They're very unusual. There were 3 of them, and they all had gray hair from birth. Their names were Enyo, which means wasp-like, which means warlike, Pemphredo, which means wasp, and Dino, which means terrible. They were graceful, and they were swan-like. They even had long, thin necks, like swans. The Greeks loved long, thin necks. Their peculiarity was that between the 3 of them, they had 1 eye and 1 tooth. And they shared the eye and the tooth by passing them back and forth between them. So when Perseus needed to find where the Stygian nymphs were, and didn't know how to get there, didn't even know where to look, he sneaked up on them, and when they were passing the eye and the tooth between them, he grabbed them away, leaving them without sight or bite, and he wouldn't give them back until they would give him the information that he wanted. They gave him all the information he wanted and more. Now even this little snippet of the myth is unusual and bizarre, at least as we think of it from our mundane perspective. In the world of myth and of story and of the spirit that they represent, it's not at all unusual. In all societies, the masculine principle is considered active and assertive, and the feminine principle is considered protecting or receptive. The threefold spirit, which was in early human history and prehistory much more passive than active, was seen not as 3 masculine figures then, it was seen as 3 feminine figures. The eye has always represented waking consciousness, whether in the outer or in the inner worlds. So this little vignette out of the larger story is about waking consciousness in the threefold spirit. The fact is that waking consciousness is always in the spirit, whether the spirit is in the body or not. The bodies, all of them, are marvelous receptors. They take in experience from the various worlds in which they are situated. But the conscious recognition of that information or of that experience is in the spirit. It is that waking, objective self-consciousness, the consciousness of the Spirit or of God, that we are seeking. We realize we're in darkness or in semi-darkness, and we want light, more light. Now, strange as it may seem, this little snippet from mythology tells us much, much more about waking spiritual consciousness. Christian mysticism does too, but it does it in a much more straightforward manner. But in the process of becoming straightforward, it's also much more limited. The Spirit is one and it's universal. that the manifest spirit has three primary attributes or aspects which are also universal. They have representatives. The three attributes of the universal spirit have three representatives that stand for them. In Christianity, they're represented as the three persons, or better, the three personages of the Godhead, which is a divine representation. In Christian mysticism, we also learn that the threefold attributes of spiritual identity are associated with three states of spiritual being: divine spirit, life spirit, and human spirit, which is in universal ideational thought. Beyond that, there is a virgin spirit, virgin to individuation and virgin to and from manifest existence. So it indirectly, but very directly at the same time, the virgin spirit is watching its becoming through the threefold spirit, the three states of manifest spiritual being. In a way, it is a silent watcher that is the eye in the center of the triangle. This combination of virgin spirit as watcher and the three powers of being form a self, or some people call it a spiritual ego. However, since this is all in spirit, this self or spiritual ego is no more definite than an abstract thought or idea. And most of it is more subtle than that. So this self or God as self are universally conceived spiritual ideas. And they're conceived to the end of objective waking self-consciousness. Now, as you can see, compared to the story of the gray, it's difficult to speak about these things with our language, because our language is suited to material experiences. And the further we get into trying to communicate things that are spiritually live, like a story is live, the more we have to avoid limitation, and we have to avoid misunderstanding, and so we have to qualify and qualify and qualify. It's very tedious and cumbersome to be exact. It's so much more simple to imply something in a story form. A good example of this is how the threefold spirit expresses and experiences in the macrocosm and in the microcosm at this stage of evolution. Being spirit, it is continuous and it is eternal. The three attributes or states of spirit are being actively and passively, continuously. But relative to the limits that facilitate personal manifestation or concrete manifestation, they take turns to attain various ends in the process of evolutionary creation. This is found in the mysteries of all times and all places and in all religions. In Christianity and in Christian mysticism. We hear of a much earlier religion that was of the second attribute, the life spirit, the Christ, in an order called the Order of Melchizedek, when all were one and equal. That's the way St. Paul describes it in his writings. That earlier pre-Christian Christianity was succeeded by the religions of Jehovah, the third attribute. And those are race religions. And they divide and subdivide and specialize races, tribes, families, everything leading to individuation, to individual selves. This is succeeded or to be succeeded by the future religion of the Christ, the second attribute, at which time individuals will voluntarily choose to live in unity. It'll be like the ancient church of Melchizedek, only it'll be voluntary. It'll be unified, it'll be equal, and it'll be held together in altruistic love. We are told by Christ that this will be followed by a return to the religion of the Father, the first attribute, which is currently beyond our grasp. There's a huge principle in this, and it can be found in many functions, in many levels, in both the macrocosm and the microcosm. Throughout the whole evolutionary creation you can find it. In Rosicrucian literature it is stated with beauty and with poetic words in a little book called Solstice and Equinox Services. I'll just read you a couple sentences out of there, or maybe even just one. When God exercises the attribute of preservation for the purposes of sustaining the bodies generated by Jehovah under the laws of nature, God appears as the Redeemer, Christ, and radiates the principles of love and regeneration directly into any planet where the creatures of Jehovah require this help to extricate themselves from the meshes of mortality and egoism in order to attain altruism and endless life. How can you not pay homage to somebody who can write something that beautifully? In that same little booklet, which can't be more than 50 pages long, there are similar sentences describing the other two attributes of the threefold Spirit and how they interact with each other. It's in the little essay on the winter solstice. All of them are elegant, beautifully elegant. But all of them, like this example, have lots of qualification. It's beautiful qualification, but qualification nonetheless. So when we think of that, how beautifully simple it is to say that the Grey Sisters pass the eye between them. It says the same thing, and it means many things on many levels as we're going to see it. But you have to work very hard to get it. That's the way stories and allegories are. We're spoon-fed by Max Heindel and other writers. So, this indicates a change of growth in consciousness by a change of accentuated spiritual perception and function being passed back and forth, whether it is through the religion of the Christ to the religion of the Holy Ghost, back to the religion of the Christ, back to the religion of the Father, or whether it's the Grey Sisters passing the eye, it's the same kind of thing. In this little talk, we're going to talk about one tiny set of details. One passing of the eye as it relates to our current evolutionary status and our spiritual seeking. In order to do that, we have to endure one more long introduction of a spiritual principle. These are all always nothing but introductions. That principle can be stated very simply in one word: repetition. In our world these days, humans flatter themselves. They indulge themselves with increasingly exotic novelty. It always has to be new. It has to be different. And in that world, repetition is not much appreciated. In mysticism, repetition has a level of appreciation that is similar to that of a little child when it comes to reading bedtime stories. That child wants to hear the story again and again and again. The pages start falling out of the book, but the child wants to hear it again. That's good repetition. That's a child that knows what's good for it. Christian mystics find that repetition has many functions in cosmogony, cosmology, and our spiritual development. In the spiral method of development and education into that spiral method, it permeates the creation. It is used to give repeated experiences so things can sink in, even though it is a God that is being awakened. It takes a lot for it to sink in. It takes millions of years. And so repetition after repetition helps that. But with the spiral method, because everything in the manifest cosmos is a spiral, that function of repetition gives us slightly different circumstances each time. As we go around loops again and again and proceed forward, it's repetition, but from a slightly different point of view. And so we can see all of the universal meanings of the universal spirit, all of those facets, all of those sides to truth. We can experience them all while we're having it all sink in repetitively. That's the way we begin to appreciate the Spirit. In soul growth and the awakening of consciousness in our lives, repetition is used several ways. First off, it's a means to organize the vital body. The vital body, in its basic nature compared to the physical, is very fluid, and it accomplishes things in waves. Everything in the body is done rhythmically. The heartbeat, the work of the lungs, everything is rhythmic. Even our lives, our daily lives are rhythmic. Our lives and our body function can be described in what are called circadian cycles that repeat themselves again and again, day after day. However, this kind of usage of the principle of repetition can be misused. We can just repeat things inanely again and again, and that's a misuse of it. It's a vain repetition. It'll still have effect. We quoted Krishnamurti when he said, if you say Coca-Cola enough times, you'll have a profound and shocking experience. And we have all had the experience of learning that a lie told enough times becomes a truth to the teller. Because each time a lie is told, It is energized, and it competes with the truth. And if the truth is not something that has been created by the divine, that is an archetypal truth, but just an ordinary human fact, a lie can supplant the truth by many, many repetitions. And liars, after a while, even begin to believe their lives are true. It's a sad thing. So, a lie can build up a familiar wave in the vital body, just like any good habit can build up a familiar wave in the vital body. And because it's familiar, it feels true. So it was in ancient scriptures, in rites, in ceremonies, and in rituals, and in liturgies. We find that repetition was employed liberally. We find it still in the Catholic Church. Things are repeated over again and again and again. Sometimes it was chants. In very ancient times it was mantras. In other times it's recitals and hymns. Oh, hey. Our refrain in popular music, when we go back to the refrain and again, that's always an atavism of that same technique. However, in modern times, repetition is used in a much different manner. It is used for emphasis. When a thing is repeated by a great spiritual being or an artist or somebody like that, it's repeated for emphasis because it's important. If you look at the finish of the Ninth Symphony by Beethoven, he repeats the same little phrase again and again and again and again and again. I think it's almost 9 times that he repeats it. And it is closing the door, like slamming it. It's there with emphasis. Thus, when Christ Jesus repeats something several times, such as "it cometh as a thief in the night," it is to emphasize and re-emphasize the subtlety of spirituality and how easy it is to miss the comings of, or the beckonings of, the subtle spirit. If we're not keenly attentive, it'll come as a thief in the night. That's an exceedingly important point. It's worth the study of going through the Gospels and finding out all the things that are repeated. In Max Heindel, there are also repetitions for emphasis. And one of them I have found very remarkable and very fruitful, and it is at the heart of part of what we're trying to do. I'll give you a paraphrase that isn't it exactly, because he mentions it in different ways in different places. All consciousness is a result of the struggle between the vital body and the desire body. All consciousness is a result of a struggle between the vital body and the desire body. Now that's a really remarkable statement. If we're hoping to awaken consciousness and improve our consciousness and be attentive in it, that's really a remarkable statement. It's very important. That's why it's repeated a number of times in a number of places. This is something big, something important, but it's something that we may not understand well. I've been a student of Rosicrucian philosophy for just about 40 years now, and I've studied it deeply and intensively, and I've tried very hard to live it, but I still realize I'm nothing but a beginner. I've looked at similar philosophies, and I find wonderful things in them, but this is home. I have loads of friends among Rosicrucian students, and loads of friends among just about every other major spiritual philosophy. From these meetings with these friends, I've learned that there are common characteristics to people who follow different paths. And that includes Rosicrucian students. There is, if you want to say it, I don't like saying it that way, there is a Rosicrucian type. Just like there are other types. I'll just mention one little facet of a Rosicrucian type. For example, Rosicrucian students in their inner life are extremely ardent. They're striving very hard in their prayer life, in their inner life, to wake up. But when that ardency is coupled with self-consciousness, it often leads to self-righteousness. And self-righteousness is something that I think almost every Rosicrucian student must plead guilty to, myself included. No doubts about it at all. Beyond this, there are also characteristics mutually concerning the philosophy, the founder, and the students. In this regard, it is extremely unusual and painfully ironic that one of the greatest virtues of Max Heindel has proven to be one of the greatest stumbling blocks for his followers. The virtue that Max Heindel has is that he is clear. He is extremely clear. His writing is limpid. It's crystalline. It's pellucid. Whatever word you want to use, he's clear. And the problem is that we all read Max Heindel, and because it's so clear, we think we know what it means. Sometimes we go off for years or even decades thinking we know what he means, and if we're self-righteous about it, we criticize others who we think don't know what it means, when the fact of the matter is that we often really don't know it ourselves. I have found that some of the most simple and clear statements that one thinks one knows right off require a good deal of pondering. And even much more than that, they require a good deal of living. To live out some of those very simple statements is very difficult. With this recognition, it behooves us to heed it. So we should always ask ourselves the question, what does this mean? What does this mean? Thus, when we hear an important statement such as, all consciousness is a result of the struggle between the vital body and the desire body, we understand what the words say, but we have to ask ourselves, what does this mean? And so this little talk is an introduction or a beginning of trying to work into understanding the meaning of that statement. And to do that, it means a very brief review of some of the most basic elements of Rosicrucian philosophy. First, let's briefly, extremely briefly, review the vital body and the desire body. The vital body is our vehicle of experience through which we relate to the etheric subdivision of the physical plane. All kinds of qualification there, but it's one of those things, do we know that? It's composed of 4 ethers, which we can experience. And in the early talks in this series, we talked about ways that we can and do experience them. So it's composed of energy, vitality, biological life. We said that the vital body, the ethers were divided into 2 types, the biological ether, the biological part of the vital body, which contains the chemical ether and the life ether. And they're associated with the building, the holding together, the vitality, all of those things of the physical body. They build it, they cleanse it, they rebuild it, they modify it, they repair it. They are also involved with reproduction, from the cellular level to total procreation. The soul ethers are the light and reflecting ethers, and they are involved with circulation, coloration, perception, memory, and thought in the physical world. They are much more rare and thin than the biological ethers, but they're capable of unlimited growth where the biological ethers are not. So through soul building, we can have unlimited soul ether. We'll be discussing on Monday the whole process of soul growth, so we won't be too tedious about this. The desire body is a much younger vehicle in its development. It's younger than the vital body, and certainly much younger than the dense physical body. It is our vehicle for experience in the desire world. Through it we feel. Every feeling that we feel, every emotion, every mood, everything that we're interested in, every pain that we feel in the desire world. So that world and that body have the function of motivating us, which is what desire does. We're motivated through passion, mood, and so on. The desire body is so young in its development that it's barely formed. It's an indistinct ovid, ovoid. It is an aura of emotion and feeling that we experience in a way similar to the way we experience color. And it's constantly changing, even though it has a basic tone to it. The only structure that we find in the desire body are a few very nascent sense centers which are like eddies or whirling vortices. These vortices draw in the desire material, and through an inner dimension it gets recycled and flows out again through another vortex at the great liver. At the liver, the great vortex at the liver is what I'm trying to say. If one is very feelingful and very adapted to the world of desire, these vortices are filled with light. Brilliant, brilliant light. And if one is very awake or very conscious in them, then one can actually perceive feelings through feelings, just like we perceive the external world through a body made of the external world. The constitution of the desire body in its color sense varies from being very dark and murky in selfish people to very bright and very colorful people, depending on what they're doing, what their evolution is in terms of feeling and emotion. We won't say much more than that, but with this very rudimentary knowledge of the vehicles, let's try to understand the struggle between the vital body and the desire body, which we are told produces consciousness. Each of these vehicles has a nature of its own, which, if left by itself alone, would live perfectly, succinctly in that function, in that nature. For example, if one had only a vital body and maybe a dense body, the vital body would live and grow and do its housekeeping and take care of itself, and it would tend to the physical exclusively. We can see that in nature. That's what a plant is. A plant, we say, merely vegetates, and it has that kind of experience only. If one had only a desire body with no mind and no self-conscious spirit to contain it and direct it, and a vital body to damp it, and a physical body, one would be a wild being of desire, motivated by all kinds of desires until there was a complete exhaustion of the vital body or physical body. In such cases, we would be like an animal, only an animal almost gone mad with pure animated existence. We would be bundles of feeling and emotion. So we can see that there is an antithetical nature between these two vehicles with the function that each of them has. There's bound to be a struggle between antithetical natures if they seek a common end, which each of these vehicles does. The common end that both the vital body and the desire body seek is the control of the dense physical body. The vital body seeks to grow, vegetate, maintain, and vitalize the dense body. That's what it was created and evolved to do. The desire body seeks to stimulate it, to move it, to drive it, to push the dense body for new experience by desiring new objects of desire. The more intense and exciting the experiences, the better it is for the desire body, and the more it revels in its being. This is the ongoing antithetical struggle. Now, normally the desire body prevails during the daytime. That's when we're highly active, and that's when we're attracted and repelled from various objects that the desire body beholds. Eventually what happens? We experience it every day. The vital body tires. The dense physical body becomes clogged from all of the products of activated cellular workings. All things done at the behest of desire. When this occurs, the spirit can no longer function through the dense physical body, and it withdraws, and it takes along with it everything but the biological ethers of the vital body, and we call that state sleep. When the biological ethers of the vital body are left alone, they are recharged and they're harmonized by the macrocosmic higher worlds. And then they're unimpeded, and they can cleanse, and they can restore, and rebuild the physical body. They do it through and especially the catabolistic activities of metabolism. Catabolism goes way up at night when we're sleeping. As the vehicles are restored by the macrocosmic worlds, this activity is hastened. It's hastened if we retrospect. It's hastened if we don't break down the physical body too much. So we can see that the desire body has ascendancy in the day when both it and the vital body are active. But the desire body is pushing us forward to new experiences. But the vital body, which is made in the image of the life spirit, in the image of the Christ, it wins by losing, and it gets its ascendancy at night when the activities are almost exclusively vegetating. Now this gives us a very little understanding of the struggle of the vital body and desire body that is responsible for all consciousness at this stage of evolution. But it doesn't address consciousness very well. This is the part that we often neglect. So we have to ask ourselves on a deeper level, what does this mean when it is said that all consciousness is a result of the struggle between the vital body and the desire body? But we can see that this process of becoming consciousness, becoming conscious, we can see that this is going on, and we're developing consciousness even if we're subsistence living. People every day are waking in consciousness, not because they're doing spiritual exercises, not because they are educated one way or another, but just because the struggle between the desire body and the vital body are going on. That struggle is going on, and it's going on continuously. And so everybody's waking up as a result of it. But we're trying to do this self-consciously. Therefore, we ask the question, what does this mean? Now, mystics have findings about consciousness that seem rather peculiar to our darkened materialistic consciousness, or our minds in materialism. A few minutes ago, we mentioned that if we cut a finger, we may distress the physical body, we may injure a nerve, and we feel pain. We don't feel the pain in the physical body. We feel it in the desire body. We could be a little bit more exact, and we could say we stress a nerve, and the experience of that stress is carried through the etheric stuff that we call nervous fluid, and it's carried into the vital body, and through the vital body and into the desire body where it registers as a feeling. That's where it's felt. Now, in an analogous way, the pain that is felt in the desire body as a result of stress or damage in the dense physical body, that pain awakens consciousness, but the consciousness is in the spirit. All experience in any of the vehicles of experience, which are sometimes called vehicles of consciousness, whether it's the dense physical body, the vital body, the desire body, or the concrete mind, all of the consciousness is felt in the spirit. The bodies are vehicles of experience which registers as consciousness in the threefold spirit. Now, a second peculiar finding of mystics is that at present we have only waking self-consciousness in the dense physical body. It's the only place that we're really wide awake. And even that waking spiritual consciousness in the dense physical body is very limited and dim. The spirit is doing all kinds of things in the body that we have not awakened self-consciousness to. All of the biological activities that are being done by the spirit. And it knows what it's doing. If we do have waking consciousness in the vital body and or the desire body, we are then clairvoyant. We have a spiritual perception in those realms. And we wouldn't lose consciousness when we go to sleep. We would take self-consciousness with us. It is for this reason that the product that is formed in body, in spirit, as a result of the interaction of spirit with matter in the physical body is called conscious soul. Because right now our most basic consciousness is a result of what happens in the physical body. Because that's where we're awake. And in some ways, the character of the vital body and the character of the desire body, struggling for control of the physical body, are doing so for that self-consciousness, and they serve for that consciousness, and they serve that consciousness. They serve the whole process of evolution by bringing us to consciousness in the dense physical body through what is called conscious soul. Now you can see by now that we've opened up several mammoth topics. It would probably take many talks to cover this thoroughly. We're only going to introduce some of these things and touch on them lightly to get at a central, sort of like a thin line of consciousness that we're trying to get through to so that we can understand, at least in a very simple way, maybe even simplistic, this one idea that all consciousness is the result of the struggle between the vital body and the desire body. What we are part of and what we participate in is a colossal evolutionary creation. It is a creation or a great giving of the universal spirit. And it's just like any work of an artistic creation. It is a creative giving wherein the universal spirit knows itself in the creation just as an artist knows itself in the creation. Now, there are three major facets to this work. One is the materialization of spirit. Spirit materializes itself and takes upon itself, or makes from itself, limited form in either a world in macrocosm or a body in microcosm. The second activity is the spiritualization of matter, or matter is brought into spirit. And the third activity of the evolutionary creation is a consequence of the interaction of spirit and matter, and it is awakening and evolving consciousness. So we have the materialization of spirit, the spiritualization of matter, and the awakening and evolution of consciousness. All three facets of this activity are operative on all levels of the macrocosm and the microcosm. Let's look at them a little bit without going into much detail, but just enough to get an idea. By the materialization of spirit, it is meant that the universal spirit protects or projects its being into the unknown of the absolute, which is absolute, that is everything that is known and everything that is unknown, and that understanding or that absolute that it projects itself into is within itself. Everything is within in the spirit. And so that projection of spirit becomes congealed in the unknown as various states of matter. In the macrocosm, the states are worlds or realms. In the microcosm, where individual foci of the universal spirit are working, they are bodies, or as we call them, vehicles of consciousness. The struggle or actualization or realization of the creative dream that is projected into this congealed ignorance, which is part of it, takes a long, long time, and it progresses by stages. As the spirit progresses in this activity, it gets to know the unknown in matter better, and it builds better and better forms. So the process is slow not only because the spirit is awakening, but because the spirit is projecting into the unknown, and it has to go through all of these activities to become familiar, or to waken up that of itself which in the absolute was unknown before. As it does so, as it builds better and better vehicles, it becomes more involved. In every sense of the word, it's more involved in its vehicles. And as it becomes more involved in the worlds and the vehicles, it becomes familiar with them. And eventually, through this involution, it enters into them. It penetrates into them, and it knows them. This is carnal knowledge in a much different use of the word carnal knowledge than we normally use. But that's exactly what it is. When it knows its vehicles and their stuff, and it knows them as part of itself, that is the beginning of waking self-consciousness. It's a waking to reality. Now, most of us have been listening to a number of talks on this, and we've seen in previous talks that we have gone through various states of dim consciousness before we have reached waking self-consciousness. However, the waking internal self-consciousness marks the beginning of the participation in the third factor, that is the awakening and evolution of completely objective self-consciousness. The Creator has been awake and growing and evolving in spirit from the beginning, and various creative hierarchies have entered in at various times along the way. But the self-consciousness that we're speaking of begins when there is this internal awakening within the stuff. In some mythologies and some religions, matter is even seen as the enemy. It's seen as evil. And it's when the spirit gets under the skin of the enemy, gets within the stuff of matter itself, that the enemy is overcome. So this self-consciousness also marks the beginning of our conscious participation in the second facet of the creative activity, which is the spiritualization of matter. as we interact with the unknown in the various grades and states of matter through our various bodies, we become familiar with it, and we see it as part of ourselves, and we internalize the essence of it into our spiritual being. In this activity, the unknown becomes known, and it is incorporated into the knowing or conscious universal spirit, as well as the individual foci, the individual spirits. This is not a mere contrived process, and it's not a fragmentary process. It is a real process. The Spirit is giving its all fully in the entire creation. There's no stint. This is an all-out thing for the Spirit. It realizes the dream. It realizes the unknown because it gives all of itself and it goes beyond itself. And it is in the process of going beyond itself that Spirit grows. So it's a real process, and the stuff of matter is, as the alchemists say, it's really transmuted into spirit. And you might say it is as living food for the growing spirit. But because of the colossal, almost unspeakable nature of spirit in eternity, it's hard to conceive of it as growing. It doesn't grow in the same way that a plant grows. And obviously when we're talking about food, we're not talking about aliment the way we eat food every day. These things have different meanings on different levels. We have a lot of these questions to ask. What does this mean? But gradually, if we stay with them, we do wake up to what they mean. Now there is an intermediate state in this process where matter is transmuted into spirit and the unknown into the known, and that intermediate state is called soul. Soul is matter in the process of being transmuted and assimilated into spirit. It's the essence of matter. It doesn't have to carry all of the unknown ignorance around. Once it's known, the essence of that knowledge is part of spirit. Now, since there are various states of matter, there are various kinds of soul. And this brings us back to what we've been speaking of since the very beginning of this talk. We began speaking about the gray, the three old crones with one eye and one tooth between them. At that time we said that the crones represented three faces of the threefold spirit, and the eye represented the focus of waking self-consciousness. Now, any mathematician can tell one that 3 is the least number of lines or individuated points as vertices that will differentiate an object with an inside and an outside in any number of dimensions from 1 to n. We talked about that yesterday. We don't need to repeat ourselves on that. Thus, if the universal spirit is to become manifest, to become objectified, the simplest number of facets of being to do that is 3. Hence we have a threefold spirit at the heart and at the beginning of the manifestation of the universal spirit. Rosicrucian philosophy calls the potential in spirit that has not been awakened to all consciousness, to self-consciousness, it calls that virgin spirit. We mentioned it a little bit earlier. By whatever name, it is all conscious, but it is unknowing and unknown as waking, objective self-consciousness. So when the universal spirit turns inward and focuses its intention on the inner darkness, the unknown, the potential of things that could be, on its own ignorance, it is in the virgin spirit that it is doing this. And it projects its dream into that as an interface to know that, or to become that. And it does that with three faces so that it can be objectified in the simplest way possible to be close to the universality of spirit and the knowing that spirit does in that simple way. Thus, when the threefold spirit projects itself into the unknown, there are three states of matter. And all of this is accomplished through the center of being, through a proto-mind which eventually becomes mind. This mind functions as a lens and as a mirror. And in both functions, it is a variable focus lens or mirror, if you're familiar with physics. So, let's draw a little picture. It's an ugly picture. Leave the top open because spirit is open-ended. So, we find that the deepest of spirit, the basic being, the will to be, gets, when it goes through the lens, is focused in the deepest of matter. And it becomes the stuff of physical matter. The life spirit, when focused through the lens, becomes the etheric realm. Just like the life spirit produces everything in its perfect imagination, the vital body produces forms and it supports those forms just as Christ the Redeemer supports everything that is in existence throughout all the realms, spiritual and physical. And finally, the self, the human spirit, that conceived idea that knows itself, is projected into the desire world, colorful desire world. It looks like this is going to take a little bit more than 90 minutes this morning. The upshot of all of this is when the indwelling spirit interacts with the various states of matter through its corresponding vehicles composed of those states of matter, three distinct kinds of soul are transmuted from those three distinct states of matter into three distinct attitudes of spirit. So there is conscious soul, which makes for the basic consciousness of being, which is the essence of experience in the simplest way possible, from just simple, dense form in matter. As we said earlier, it results not only in the will in the spirit, but in the fundamental waking consciousness. The intellectual soul, this is a Greek term. The later Rosicrucians were earlier Greek mystery students. And the life spirit to the ancient Greeks was called the realm of intellect because it was pure truth. In the same way that Christ calls its own being, I am the truth. That intellectual soul, which is the essence of experience in the vital world or in the vital body, in etheric matter, it becomes that which feeds the life spirit. And the life spirit grows and awakens through it. And finally, there is the emotional soul, which is the essence of the experience of the desire world and the desire body that becomes spiritualized and feeds the human spirit, the self. It results in individuality, in differential, in differentiation, in active motion. Now, this is all going to be discussed in detail and with much work on Monday, which it talks about the central work of what all Rosicrucians are trying to do, even us as mere Rosicrucian students. For right now, it's sufficient to know that we have three forms of experience that relate to physical form, vital life, and emotional motivation. Each of these varieties of experience is spiritualized into first soul and then eventually into spiritual consciousness. Each of these varieties of soul is assimilated to its parent spiritual principle. The assimilated soul results in spiritual growth and the awakening of consciousness in each of the attributes of the threefold spirit. Now we're very close, in a simplistic way, to answer the question, or we're very close to an answer now, to answering the question, what does it mean when we say all consciousness is a result of the struggle between the vital body and the desire body? First, we can say that it would be much more lengthy, but much more clear to say that all consciousness at this stage of evolution is the result of the struggle between the vital body and the desire body for control of the dense physical body and waking experience in it. This is so because it is the experience in the dense body that is vitalized and that is motivated by the vital and desire bodies that becomes consciousness. Now, this would be a pretty good answer to our question, but it is not quite enough, and it leaves germane and permanent things unanswered. A few minutes ago, we said that bodies are the vehicles of experience, but consciousness is in the spirit. The more indwelling and the more involved that spirit is in its vehicles, the more close the experience is to the spirit and its waking consciousness. A few minutes ago, we also said that each of the vehicles of experience produces a different kind of soul material when self-consciously exercised. Now let's put those two facts together and add one more fact, and we will have a pretty good simple answer. When we combine these facts, we learn that the more experience of each of our vehicles we have, the greater consciousness we have in the corresponding spirit. For example, the more soul material we develop through our vital bodies in self-sacrificing service, the more we spiritualize the vital body, and the more we have of the Christ consciousness in the life spirit. The more we experience in the physical body, the more we have of general waking consciousness of being of any kind. And specifically, the more will we have in divine spirit, the will to be and to do. And finally, the more we experience in the desire body through motivation to feel things out, the more self-consciousness and the more individuated we become in the human spirit, the self, the individuality or the spiritual ego. Hence, there is a logical or a theological order to how we awaken consciousness in the spirit. It's happening on all levels, but the accentuation or the order of development is important. For example, if we were to awaken all consciousness exclusively in the divine spirit, and to do that first, it would be nigh unto impossible, if not outright impossible, to awaken individual self-consciousness. We would be in something that is even more than a blissed out state. Similarly, it would be the case if the life spirit were also to be awakened before the human spirit. This is exactly why Christ says, I cannot stay with you now, but I will return. And that is exactly why he leaves us the Comforter, which is the human spirit, which is the self. This is exactly why Pentecost could not occur until after the ascension. Because if we awaked in the general case, there would be no self-consciousness. There would be consciousness, but it would not be self-consciousness, and it would not be objective. So it is clear that if we are to have objective, waking self-consciousness, and that selfness is the important thing to the spirit. Otherwise, it is just an amorphous, all-consciousness that doesn't know its own being. As conscious as it is, it can be in a state of consciousness without knowing it is it. Right now, it is clear that this is true in the world. It's carried out to great extreme. There are very few that are conscious of altruistic love and the sacrifice of the life spirit. Almost everyone that we know is keenly self-conscious, and keenly self-conscious in the struggle between the true self and the lower nature, the personal ego. Everybody's aware of that struggle. Some, it's a schizophrenic struggle. This inner struggle is extremely important, but it is not exclusive. And it doesn't have to be only struggle. Because if that were true, we wouldn't need the vital body and the dense body. The struggle between the higher and lower nature could take place between the spirit and the desire body. The threefold spirit is threefold. So the struggle is more than just a higher self and a lower self. It is a threefold spirit working and struggling through its threefold body. Or else the spirit in itself cannot be whole in its objectivity. There's another factor to this, and that is symbolized in the crones, in the gray that pass the eye back and forth. If we walk into a forest, we see many things, many more things than we comprehend. But often when we walk in the forest, we miss most of the animal life. This is so because the group spirits of the animals realize that there is safety in stillness. Possums depend on it. If something is unmoving, it's much more difficult to detect it. But if we become unmoving for a while, gradually the animal life comes alive, and we see the forest filled with animal nature. Consciousness produces motion, and motion produces consciousness. Or said in a better way, change produces awareness, and awareness produces change. If the eye were to remain with one of the crones, there would be no change in perspective, and there would be no enhanced consciousness. Thus, though self-consciousness must come first in order for total consciousness to be arrived at, and the self-conscious, the awareness and the participation in something for itself, it can't remain the only consciousness. In fact, self-consciousness is only meaningful with regard to other consciousness. If we're by ourselves alone and we have no one else to love, no one else to interact with, that self-consciousness isn't any good to us. And that's just in a petty human experience. Each of the vertices of the triangle, each of the three gray sisters is absolutely necessary for a manifest, objective waking consciousness. So the eye of attention, the eye of the focus of consciousness must change hands. This is why, in the big sense, as we said a few minutes ago, things have to go from the religion of Melchizedek to the religion of Jehovah, back to the religion of the Christ, which is the religion of Melchizedek on a higher level, and then back to the Father. It's absolutely necessary that this passing of attention takes place. So we can see that we are in a state of evolution where the eye of consciousness is with the human spirit. But it is also in a time when it's being passed back and forth with the life spirit, the selfness. So we are beginning at our stage of evolution to not only be aware of self, but of the selfness, that universality of which all individuated beings partake of. So we're beginning to be aware of self as being able to be initiators and knowers for the universal spirit, as well as being selfish beings. And at the same time, we're becoming aware of the other. We're becoming aware of an altruistic love for every other focus in that Venus. Through Christ and the life spirit, we know ourselves. We know ourselves because we're loved by the life spirit. We've been loved into existence. And the life spirit is glorified through us. If we live with that attention in our selfhood, that our self represents something that is greater or beyond our selfhood, then the life spirit is glorified in it. We're like children in it that bring home honors or glory to it. So the passing of the eye is of vital importance. This is a step toward all consciousness in the divine spirit, but coming home with complete waking self-consciousness. And that divine spirit needs that waking objective self-consciousness. Our success in awakening consciousness in the human spirit and in the life spirit and in the interplay between the two of them, which is accelerated in initiation. Initiation is to be loved by Christ and to know oneself as God. That's part of every initiatory experience. That all depends on how much soul material we generate in the desire body and in the vital body. This depends on how much we put into both members and how much we put into the struggle, be it cooperative or competitive or even antithetical, how much we put into the vital and the desire bodies. We'll talk about it some on Monday when we talk about soul growth, but let's say one or two things and then close. It's much better, it's more efficient, and we get more out of it if we do this work with ardency and with full awareness of what we're doing. But it's going to carry on even if we're blasé like the people of the world, desiring things and tiring themselves out in doing them. Even if we reach or come to the edge of comatose vegetation, or if we come to close to maniacal emotional frenzy, it's still taking on. If the self prevails over the pseudo-self with all of its cunning and machinations, it can be much more efficient and much more clear. The real work of developing higher emotions and motivations can develop in earnest if it isn't involved with petty selfishness and destructive desires. The more we can put our attention, our spiritual life, to live into it, the more productive this struggle is. No matter what we're doing in our daily life, we can intentionally put the Spirit into it so that what's happening between the desire body and the vital body can happen on a higher level. A lot more could be said about this, but it's a nice little beginning to look with gratitude to Max Heindel for emphasizing that all human consciousness is a result of the struggle between the vital body and the desire body. In other places in the literature, there are statements about it, but there's a very fine section in the Cosmoconception on the subject that goes into detail of how desire actually brings about the hardening of the bones, and how the ethers bring about the softening through the bloodstream, how the soft tissue is developed, and that there is a constant struggle between the vital body and the desire body, even in the formation of the physical body. This shifts even throughout life. The accumulated desires of life make us harder. Our skin is harder, our bones are harder. A baby, the bones are almost like rubber. And so the whole process of our consciousness changing, and what we see as we're waking, as we mature, day by day, year by year, is a consequence of this struggle between the vital body and the desire body. This is a really big thing. This talk is meant to be an introductory talk to a possible spin-off series on the whole subject of waking consciousness. And this particular facet of waking consciousness in specific. So, what can we say? At our time in evolution, all consciousness is a result of the struggle between the vital body and the desire body. It's something worth pondering, and it's something worth trying to live more efficiently and more fully. So let's close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.